Hello and welcome. My name is Eero Pikat and I'm the president of Barchart. Barchart provides market data and solutions for a variety of industries. And this is our Cybersecurity for Agriculture webinar. For the agricultural industry, we provide not just the best of breed data and analytics software in the name of Commodity View, but also hosting services for agribusinesses, cash bid management, auto hedging solutions, and true producer to merchandiser workflow solutions for co-ops, grain elevators, food processors, and other agribusinesses, both large and small. This webinar is part of our summer series. The summer series has had in-person events in Indianapolis, Minneapolis, and Omaha, and we have two upcoming events, one in Chicago and one in St. Louis. If anyone attending this webinar would also like to attend one of those in-person events, please contact your Barchart representative after this seminar. This is part of our continuing commitment for our agricultural customers and is part of a continuing resource. Now, before I do an introduction to our webinar partner, Vizius, I want to talk about why we are doing this webinar. And we can advance, I think, the slide one or two, please. Ransomware and hacker attacks are becoming larger and larger in the agricultural space. And as part of the summer series in-person events, talking with some of our customers, it became apparent that cybersecurity is really a top of mind for merchandisers, IT departments, and security departments in many of our customers. Now, no ag firm is too small. Single location elevators, co-ops, large processors, and everything in between have in fact been hit by cyber attacks and ransomware attacks in the past year and a half. A cyber attack, ransomware, or extortion event can be a complete disruption to your workflow and to your processes. Imagine not having access to scale tickets, your ERP, your CRM systems. So much of what happens nowadays is automated, and having a disruption in that system could block you from doing your business. Now, the digitization of agriculture has become a key focus and driver for future innovation. And at Barchart, we're providing that in our workflow solutions where farmers and merchandisers meet in our ecosystem and can transact their grain. However, because of this, the ecosystem also expands the vulnerability to cyber attacks, and the integrations between our ERP partners, producers, the apps that we have, trading, auto hedging, all of that provides additional surface area for potential attacks. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about how we found Vizius. Vizius is not a company that likes to sell some kind of a certification system. And one of the problems that we found in the cybersecurity space is a lot of firms really are just sales organizations and give you a rubber stamp. That's not what we were interested in when we wanted to have our systems tested, and that's why I'm very happy that we found Vizius that actually does true deep penetration testing, analysis, ongoing support for security management. Essentially, they can provide virtual CSO services. So on that note, I would like to introduce David Volpe and Glenn Johnson from Vizius. We're going to talk about how do you protect yourself from ransomware attacks.
Thank you, Eero. Appreciate the introduction, and it's been great working with you and your team. As Eero mentioned, we're a 100% cybersecurity focused firm that 100% focuses on professional services, and we offer 100% unconditional guarantee on those services. And all we do is try to help CEOs of organizations like yours to not get blindsided by the world of cyber. And so we do our best to demystify, to speak business language and business risk, to help put the context around a security assessment or a penetration test in a way that makes sense for your business, both financially and operationally, and then really try to move the needle so that by the end of an engagement, your business is better off for having worked together. So that's us. Again, thank you so much for the invitation to talk in this webinar. So I think David's going to talk a little bit just about what the FBI is telling the ag vertical, and just a little bit about how these things have happened in some recent attacks and events. David?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, and thanks for everybody being on this webinar. Showing interest in this really important topic. The days of being able to just kind of ignore cybersecurity, I think, are gone. I think that's pretty clear based on what's been going on. To that end, the FBI has pushed out a couple special bulletins to the ag industry in particular, most recently this spring, and they're highlighting that attackers are really using timing as a lever. So they're waiting to launch their attacks. They may gain access kind of at random points in the year, but they'll wait to launch their attacks for particularly sensitive times of the year, times where your business is kind of at its peak. And they'll do a little bit of research on your particular business to figure out what that time is for your business. And then they'll wait to pull the trigger to that moment. And the FBI is just kind of warning people that that's coming. And so to be particularly vigilant around those times of year. And there's some really illuminating cases that have happened the last year and a half from people in the industry and what they've experienced. And I think we can all kind of learn from what some of the other folks have experienced. And for the most part, it's been bad passwords. So people have had either weak passwords or passwords that they've used in multiple places. So they use a password to log in at work. They use the same password to log into LinkedIn or whatever, Facebook, and then that gets compromised, and then someone can just log in to the work systems with that same password. So I've been doing a deep dive on kind of the industry and some of the recent breaches that have been publicized, and of the 7 breaches that I've done a little bit of a deep dive on, 5 of them resulted from a stolen password. And so that's the most common thing, either a stolen or a weak password. And then other common scenarios we're seeing is phishing attacks. So there was one big ag business that got hit by the 1% ransomware group, and that was where they sent an email to them with an attachment. Somebody downloaded and opened the attachment, and that was all it took. So there was malware in that attachment. And once an attacker gets a little bit of a foothold, meaning if they get any kind of execution, if they can run a piece of software in your network, that code will reach back out to their servers wherever in the world they are, and that attacker now has access, and they have a foothold, and they'll just take that foothold and they will pivot. They will move throughout your organization, and they will find as many things as they can, and then wait for the right opportune moment, and then trigger a ransomware attack. And then now you're kind of over a barrel because everything's really busy, and they're asking for $3 million, $4 million. I mean, in the case of a large co-op recently, there was a $6 million demand. There was the fuel pipeline, I think everyone probably heard about. That was a $4 million one. There was a meat processor that everyone probably heard about. That was 11 million. So, and on top of that ransom demand, you can get lawsuits potentially, and then later the government can come back and try to fine you for not doing the right things, and it can become a real mess. So anyway, I think Glenn is going to dive into a little bit more of the details and also some of the constructive things that you can do. There really are some fairly straightforward and most of them are fairly simple steps that you can take to protect yourself. So Glenn, if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting, we talk about how many millions of dollars, these ransom criminals want from the business. And one question that we get asked fairly often is, what happens when you pay? And the short answer is that in about 20% of the cases, statistically, you pay the money and you still don't get what you need to get your business up and running. So one thing we are not, we are not tinfoil hat, propeller head, the sky is falling cybersecurity people. I don't know if you've ever met any of those, but I certainly have. So we're here to tell you that ransomware is not it's not the boogeyman. It is largely preventable, and it's also something that can be prevented relatively economically. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what it is, how it works, and what the impacts are. But just keep that in mind as we go through this. This is not a scare webinar, whatever. But our point is, and our desire is for you to walk away with some information that will actually make your business safer. And if you're interested, again, reach out to your Barchart salesperson. But we actually have a white paper where we go through these recommendations in detail, and we're more than happy to get that to you if you're interested. So with that, first of all, what is ransomware? And ransomware is really, just think of it as a computer program that runs on your system that you didn't put there and you don't want running, right? So there are several ways for that computer program to get on your system. David mentioned phishing, so it's the classic, I have a long lost uncle in Nigeria who's left me all kind of money, and if I just click on this link and give him some information, I'll be able to get all this money, and that's really great. And so that that happens very often, and there's a reason why phishing is super popular, is because it's super effective. And so when people click on something and this program gets installed on your system, you're essentially giving access to your system. Could be your system, could be your company's system. But as soon as they have that foothold, think about your system as being part of a body of systems or a network of systems, and all those systems are connected to your business, your ERP, your grain silos, your other vendors. I mean, it's once they have sort of access to the front door, they can really walk through the whole house. And so that's sort of the key idea behind ransomware. It's not that ransomware doesn't happen to individuals; it does. I mean, I know of grandmothers and aunts and folks that have had to pay $1,000 to get their computer back from an attack like this. But the real motive behind any kind of malware attack like this is financial. So the larger the organization the attackers can compromise, the better they are, right? The better they feel, right? So once they have this malicious program installed on your computer, then typically what they do is they take time to look around and see what they got, right? So they're not necessarily targeting, Joe's corn silo in Kansas. They're generally running a discovery bot or program that looks for people with a particular type of vulnerability or susceptibility. That program is going to run on your system. Then it's going to, like David said, land and expand. It's going to spread itself as far through your corporate network as it can. And it's going to look for things like sensitive data. It's going to look for other systems that are more powerful that it can install itself on so that it can do things like crypto mining. It's going to look for information about who's in your accounting department and who cuts the checks and those kinds of things, so that it can leverage business email compromise and send the email that comes from the CFO that says, oh, we just hired a new contractor and here's his banking account information, and please send him $20,000 so we can get started. It's going to look for things like that. It's going to look for connections to your customers. So maybe you're a small organization, but you have a trusted connection to a large vendor or a large customer, a large supplier. The attacker is going to look to try to find those kinds of things, so that after it gets done fleecing you for all you're worth, it can move on to your customer without having to do much more work. And then finally, usually after they get all the stuff they want, that's when they pull the trigger and you get a screen that says, hey, you don't have access to your computer anymore because we encrypted all your hard drives. And so they'll encrypt all the hard drives in your network, and they'll tell you if you pay, 10 Bitcoin or whatever the number is, 100 Bitcoin, half a Bitcoin, depending on what they think you can pay. If you pay this to this particular digital wallet address, then we'll give you the decryption key so you can get back to business. And like David said, in these these 7 instances that have happened in the past 9 months or so, these businesses, they're in a screeching halt. They cannot receive product, they can't ship product, they can't make sales. Everything that they've done depends on their computer systems. That's what allows them to function in a way that's profitable. And when ransomware attacks and the encryption screen gets displayed, then you're left with pretty few options at that point. All right, so now that we've kind of described what it is, let's talk about how to fix it and how to prevent it. This first thing that you can do, having good backups is critical. And I would say that every single event that I've read about, every single company that we know of personally that has been hit with ransomware, people that I've talked to that have been a part of incident response, everybody thinks they've got great backups, but you don't know until something bad happens. And so when I say have good backups, there's several things that need to be included there. You need to test them. You need to be able to do a full restore of your critical systems and verify that it's operational. You need to have the backup isolated so that if someone were to encrypt all the systems on your network, you would be able to still recover. And a lot of times when we do penetration testing, we'll get into an environment and we'll find the backups and it's on the same system that the production ERP is on. And so if in those cases, if ransomware would have hit that customer, they'd be out of luck because they would not have backups accessible. But if you were to ask them, hey, do you have great backups? They probably would have said, yeah, our backups are great. We back up every night, everything is great. So having good backups means making sure they're tested, making sure they're isolated, and then making sure that it requires a different set of credentials to access, once you need to get access. And then they should also be stored in a way that's encrypted, so they're not visible to people that shouldn't have access to them. So good backups, definitely a huge, not the only thing, but it's a huge thing to do, not only to protect yourself from ransomware, but other types of IT outages and failures. The second big thing is anti-phishing training, and this is this is one of the cheapest things you can do that has the greatest amount of impact. I think the only thing that we resell is phishing training, and the reason why we do it is because there's a lot of bad phishing training out there. We found a company that does really good training that's educational and most importantly impactful. It's like $1 a user a month. I mean, it's really cheap, and in terms of security value, you can reduce your risk by probably 50% if you do solid anti-phishing training every month. So that's number 2. Number 3 is having good password hygiene. And David mentioned that a number of the compromises that we saw this year were a result of reused passwords. So you may or may not know this, but when you read about Sony got breached or Facebook got breached or whatever, you think, that sucks for them. But what happens in the breach is the attackers harvest all the stuff that they want, and then they compile a list of credentials, among other things, and then they will resell that list of credentials on the dark web, which is kind of this underbelly of the internet where illegal things happen. And so if I want to hack into Barchart, I can go buy a list of Barchart credentials if they're available, and we've checked and they're not. um, but you know, like, theoretically, if I'm looking to compromise a particular company, I can get access to those credentials that have been harvested from other sites. So I may not have a Vizius.com compromised email, but if, you know, Glenn.Johnson has a stupid password on Facebook and I reuse that somewhere else, it's very common for an attacker to try that password, and then voila, you know, it's pretty easy to, you know, to give that password a try, and it's surprisingly effective. It's amazing how many people use, you know, Chicken One or Password 123 or, you know, Go Bulldogs or whatever. I mean, it's just insane how easy it is to guess passwords sometimes. So having and using a password manager like LastPass, as a for instance, LastPass.com, there's a free version. 100% recommend that you guys you know, look at it, use it. But you can keep all your passwords in a place that's super secure and have it generate the passwords that you use every day, so that you don't even know what they are. It just autofills and it manages that for you. So password hygiene, number 3, super important. The next thing, probably the next most common avenue of attack, is vulnerable systems that are sitting in your environment. So let's just say that, you know, hey, you're in the grain business, you're not a website developer, you're in the grain business, you're not, you know, you're not an ERP, you know, software company. So you buy a system that you need because your IT people tell you you need it. And, oh, we have to make this available on the internet. So you plop the system down on the internet. Maybe it's an Amazon, maybe it's an Azure, maybe it's, you know, hosted by your own company. And when you do the testing and validation, you're testing for functionality. It's like, can I log in? Can I get the data I need? You know, and then once that project's complete, everybody's happy. What happens all the time, though, is you plunk that system down, and let's just say that the way it was configured, there's a test account or guest account that was never shut down. And so that account becomes relatively well known. It's like, so if I'm a hacker and I stumble across, you know, ERP system XYZ, there are sites on the internet where you can go say, well, hey, what are the default accounts for system XYZ? And you can get a list and you can go try them. And if they work, then boom, you're in. And so you're in the front door instead of the back door. Sometimes those systems aren't, you know, that they offer a web service, but they have other services turned on that aren't really needed for the function of the system. And those systems are vulnerable and they allow people to access them. So having someone do a scan of all of your systems to figure out what services are they offering and are there any default passwords or accounts available is a really, again, very inexpensive to do, very effective in preventing an attack or a compromise. So that's number 4. The last big one is running a good next generation antivirus, anti-malware program. So back in the day, you know, your Norton antivirus, not to throw Norton under the bus too hard, but I don't really mind that much, actually. But back in the day, when you bought an antivirus program, what it would do is it's a program that sat on your computer and it looked at all the files on your computer and it created a, you know, like a hash or a signature of the file, and it compared that hash with a list of bad computer files. And if the file on your system matched the, you know, one of the ones on the list, and it says, hey, you got a virus, and then we'll try to have you clean it up. Well, nowadays there are thousands of ways around that kind of a program. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are still running that type of antivirus instead of what we call next generation. And you cannot come to a cybersecurity presentation without someone saying artificial intelligence. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that out of the way right now. But the modern anti-malware solutions do leverage things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's a fancy way for saying what kind of behavior is happening on this box, and is that type of behavior suspicious? Instead of saying, is David on the list of people that I should not allow in? And I didn't recognize David because he's got a hat on, and I allowed him in anyway, right? So those are, again, probably if you can only do 5 things, if you do these 5 things, I think you'll probably reduce your risk of ransomware by over 90%. So David, did I miss anything or anything that you want to hop in on?
Nope. Those are the things. Do those things, do them well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. And for our audience, if anyone would like to submit their questions, there's the control panel, and then go ahead and you type your questions in there, and our moderator will send those to me. But before we do those, I've got a few of my own other things that have popped up. So you mentioned the importance of backups. Now, if someone gets a hold of your backup, though, how do you? Isn't that kind of like them getting onto the system itself? Like how do you go about securing your backups in the best? What are the best practices there?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we're paid to do a pen test, which is where we break into people's networks and their systems, people pay us to do that to figure out how we do that, right? And then we tell them and help them fix it. But when they do that, one of the first things I'm looking for is the backups, because to your point, Eero, if they're not protected properly, then it's basically all of your most sensitive and important information in one place, including passwords. So all of the systems being backed up have a repository of passwords in them in a hashed format, but there's often ways that I can reverse that. And so from that backup, I can usually get passwords to log into everything else in the infrastructure. So if you don't secure your backups, it's pretty much a game over from an attacker standpoint. And so the next part of your question is, well, then how do you protect that? So there's a couple layers to that. First and foremost is having the backups be segmented away from the rest of your organization, so that if somebody clicks on a phishing link and they get their computer compromised, the backups are not accessible to that person. He doesn't have passwords. He doesn't know how to log into that system. There's no way for him to get to that backup. That's one. And the second is to encrypt the backup. So if you encrypt the backup, again, with a set of credentials that's not tied to the network, it's not accessible anywhere else in the network, it's probably stored either in a break glass vault, like a physical security box, fireproof box. You put the password in there, that's an option. Another one would be to put it in a cloud vault, like Glenn mentioned, a password manager like LastPass. But yeah, you put the password in there and you encrypt all the backups so that you can't get to them. That's what I would recommend.
Excellent.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I'd say, if I could, Eero, just real quick, sometimes low tech is better than no tech, right? So rather than waiting for the perfect solution, spend $300 on an 18 terabyte external drive, back things up, encrypt it, throw it in a file cabinet. That's the low tech way to get there.
Excellent. One of the audience members just asked, what are your thoughts on the Apple Password Manager compared to something like LastPass?
Using a password manager is so far above not using a password manager that my recommendation is whatever password manager is convenient for you and makes sense to you and you can use that, because the difference between password managers, it gets really technical and small, and it's so much better than not using one at all that that would be my recommendation.
Now, let's say one day you walk in and you are confronted with a message that says send 100 Bitcoin to some address. What are you supposed to do? Do you just call 911, or what do you actually do at that point?
I'd recommend you call someone like us, or call your even, worst case, your FBI field office. Very, very often, though, the only reason why I listed them second is because their caseload is so high, right? That they might not get to you for a while. But if you call someone like us, what we might be able to help you figure out is this a real thing? I mean, or is this just a scare tactic, like a fancy phishing email, and you haven't really lost everything, and they just want you to send them money, right? So having someone help parse through, how serious is it is probably helpful.
And the other thing I would say is there are some organizations that just really specialize in this, and that's all they do. And they'll sell kind of retainer services that you can basically pre-negotiate and have them have a pre-existing relationship ready to go. So that's also an option for people that are really worried about that.
Okay, and so would you say the same thing if let's say you've found some strange stuff on your system, or you suspect that you've had a nefarious character scan your system? What should the next step be the same?
I think so. I mean, I think one thing that we've helped companies do is figure out, we can be a traffic cop. We know enough about the bad things like that happen, where we can say, hey, this is really, really serious. We need to pick up the phone right now and call the FBI. Or this is way bigger than, a bread box, and so you need to call a Fortalice or someone like that specializes in incident response. Or it doesn't really look that bad. Let's ask a couple questions about how protected you are. Let's try to get a really good backup, and we can help navigate through that, which is ultimately a little less expensive than some of those other options.
Potentially a lot less expensive.
Potentially.
You've mentioned we've talked mostly about ransomware as a threat to ag. Is that the only cyber-related threat, or should we be thinking about other things as well?
Well, we're in the business of telling people about threats like this, so it's a bit like asking your dentist if your teeth need to be whitened sometimes. But the reality is the business email compromise is another huge threat vector for companies in general. And so it's what I mentioned earlier, the letter that comes from the CFO that says we need to transfer money, or we need to, you need to buy some gift cards or things like that. That's a huge, I've done a lot of these sessions, and every one I ask attendees how many people have had their company fall for something like that. And I've not done any that I haven't at least one or two shows of hands. So that's another really simple one. There are definitely others, but those are two big ones.
The other one I would highlight from the recent in the ag sector in particular in the recent year and a half is extortionware, which is very similar. It's the cousin to ransomware, and they go hand in hand. But extortionware is where they will, while they're in your network and they're about to encrypt everything, they'll also what's called exfil. They'll ship out all the data back to their servers, and then they'll make you pay to get your computers back from the ransom from the encryption. And then once you do that, then they'll hit you with, oh, by the way, we also stole all your source code for your custom application. We stole all your customer list. We stole all your invoices. We stole your pricing information. We stole your client information, your employee, whatever it is. And they'll say, we're going to post all this publicly online and broadcast it unless you pay us, again, X amount of money. So that's the other kind of cousin to ransomware is extortionware. They usually do both of them at this point. Most of the criminals try to do both now.
Okay, I think some people think that this might sound a little far-fetched to think that some foreign hacker is going to target, some small grain facility in Kansas. I mean, how would they even find out about these places?
Yeah, so Glenn kind of mentioned this earlier, but basically they don't They don't often go out and specifically target any particular company. Sometimes, occasionally, there's certain criminal groups that's their MO. That's the way they operate. Is they look for a specific company and they try to attack it. But usually, that's not how they operate. What they do is they'll scan the entire internet. Everything connected to the internet is scannable. And because of the computational resources available these days, you can scan the entire internet every couple of days if you wanted to. And so anything connected can be scanned. So that's one way. The other is obviously phishing emails. They can be sent indiscriminately, right? And if your email has ever been used anywhere, it's probably on some list. And so if I know what your email is, I can send you spam, I can send you phishing emails. And I don't care what company you work with. I'm not targeting you in particular. I'm sending this email to 5 billion emails or whatever. And if you happen to click the link and my software ends up on your computer, well, I don't care that you're some small operator. I'm there and I'm going to spread and infect you, and I'll figure out how much I'm going to charge you later. But I mean, it might take me 3 hours of work to infect your whole network, and then I can ransomware you for, I don't know, $50,000. That's worth, right? So even small operators are targets.
So what is the best thing that someone can do to protect their business if they don't have a budget for cybersecurity this year?
I would say there's, your time. We have two things tied for first place. One would be implement good password hygiene, and the use of a password manager. Mandate that throughout your environment. Enable multi-factor if you have a system that supports that. So I don't know, not to use most people know what multi-factor is, but it's I sign in with my username and password and I get a prompt on my cell phone, or I type in a code in order to finish the login transaction. That's a huge needle mover. So if I could only do one thing, I'd probably do that. The second biggest thing, Eero, is proactively engage in a regular phishing training kind of a regimen for your organization. It's very, very low cost. It's incredibly effective. We're happy to point you to some good resources there if that'll help.
Yeah, and I would just add with the password manager, when you get the password manager, it's a little bit of work, but go ahead and, especially if you use the same password everywhere, go change that password. Make it like the password manager will generate a random one for you. If you can do that, that's the best. Just use a random, 15 character password that you don't have to remember, and you just copy it and paste it. But go change your password everywhere when you implement that password manager, and put a different password for every system. That is free to do, and it's the biggest thing you could possibly do to improve your security.
Are you convinced that cybersecurity and agriculture solutions must provide an integral business continuity strategy oriented to disaster recovery as a service?
I'm not sure I got all that, Eero. There's a lot of things in there.
Yeah, this is coming from I'll use JD as one of our attendees. Are you convinced that cybersecurity and agriculture solutions must provide an integral business continuity strategy oriented to disaster recovery as a service?
So I'm familiar with a lot of disaster recovery as a service kind of offerings. I think that when we do like a business impact analysis to advise people on how much money to invest in disaster recovery, that's usually where that factors in. I look at cybersecurity as sort of a foundational component where you've got cybersecurity in your business. You're doing things to actively prevent cybersecurity related outages, which requires you to have that disaster recovery as a service kind of component. So I would say that implement them in layers. So do the things that you can from a cybersecurity perspective first. Cybersecurity, though, is really about risk reduction, business risk reduction. So that's another reason why we're not big into the tinfoil hat. You need to buy, XYZ fancy gadget to make your cybersecurity program worthwhile. It's really about understand your business, understand your data flow, understand the critical systems, make sure they're protected, and then look at your residual risk. And so if your residual risk says, I've reduced it 20%, but I really need to reduce it by another 50, and that 50 might include business continuity, disaster recovery as a focus point, and that is what's right for your business. It won't be right for every business, but it is very often right for companies whose entire business hinges on availability of technology. I hope that answered the question. And by the way, if we say something that requires follow-up, we'll be happy to make our contact information available and have a one-on-one conversation if we miss the boat.
Yeah, I think that that'd be great. I think that's all the questions that I see that have popped up. Previously, when we talked, you had mentioned something that you guys have a self-assessment test.
That's right. Yeah. So if you will contact us, we will send you a link to a assessment. That assessment is free. It will help you understand kind of where you are in the spectrum of preparation for ransomware attack. We'll grade it and we'll give you the grade back with a rationale behind where we got the grade from. But the grade will be simple. It'll be A, B, C, D, F. And then we'll also offer a half an hour call to discuss the findings with you. So again, reach out to either that email address below there or to your Barchart salesperson, and we'll be glad to get you in contact with that.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for joining me today. And I'd like to thank all of our audience members for joining us. I think that this has been a fantastic resource and an excellent educational opportunity. And if for anyone in the audience, if you have any further questions, right now the slide that's up, there's the Barchart information and our email address, our phone number, and same thing with Vizius. You can reach out to them. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Eero. Appreciate your hospitality. Thanks everybody for attending.